December 1983. Dan had found a new focus to grumble about. He wanted a mansion. He was ashamed they were still living in a tract house. He didn't want Betty entertaining there anymore. He suspended the annual Christmas and dinner parties they always held over the holidays. Betty loved throwing these parties. They had become so successful, they were famous. She worked every detail, the flowers, the china, the cooking, all by herself, impressing people with things they never heard of. His guests thought Dan was wonderful to hold such lavish parties while other people were having backyard barbecues. Why can't we continue doing it? Nobody cares if we don't have a mansion. Because I don't feel like it. I want a mansion with a real crystal chandelier. During the spring, Betty busied herself trying to find the ideal mansion Dan so desired. Underneath, she was scared. Maybe this wasn't about the house at all. Maybe it was an excuse. Maybe it had something to do with Linda. December 1984. They had now gone through an entire year and they were still married. The Brodericks lived at 5555 Coral Reef. It is known as their Coral Reef home. Dan decided he wanted to repair a crack in the foundation of their Coral Reef home. Therefore, the whole family moved into a rental. They located a 7-bedroom new house with an ocean view on La Jolla shores that everyone fell in love with. And then they figured, why should they ever move back to Coral Reef again? It's the perfect opportunity to find a better house to live in. Betty had given up on her demand that they remain in La Jolla. Whatever Dan wanted was fine with her. Christmas, 1984. Once again, there were no holiday parties. Betty was certain the affair had run its course. By now she had put up with 2 years of his infidelity and lies, and what she wanted in compensation was something expensive, something like the new Porsche her girlfriend had gotten from her own philandering husband the year before. Betty got cocky. She told Dan she wanted an emerald diamond ring from a jewelry store in La Jolla. She showed him a picture of it in a San Diego magazine. She could show it off in the circles they traveled in, especially throwing it in the faces of those who were telling her to watch out for Linda. She could have bought it herself, but Betty wanted a sign of recommitment from Dan. It would mean Linda wasn't really important. On Christmas morning, Dan handed Betty a box. She had already spotted it under the tree. She could hardly wait to open it. When she did, she went into shock. It looked like a child's ring. The ring was too small for her, like something for a 6-year-old. She threw it in his face. This is an insult. Keep it. I wouldn't be caught dead wearing this. It's not even worth the gas to take it back. It's a piece of shit. Later, she said, he owed me big for the 2 years of hell he had put me through. My life had been the worst shit. And so I wanted this humongous ring, a saborite. I didn't need a ring. I had a ring. I wanted the ring. And the ring I wanted was in the thousands. I can't remember how many. $10,000? $30,000? But it was a major ring. I was looking for my reward. But instead he had the nerve to give me this little piece of shit in the low hundreds.
Just a short time before he left, had there been an argument at Christmas time over a present that your mother was unhappy about?
Yes, about a ring that he gave her.
Can you describe what happened?
She wanted this emerald ring that she's been eyeing for a long time. She really wanted it. And then he went and got her a ring, but it wasn't the ring that she wanted. So she said it was a disgrace and that she wasn't going to wear this, and it was like a child's ring, and then she threw it.
When you say she threw it, what did she do with it?
She opened it, and then she got mad about it, and then she threw the ring.
What did you see the ring? What kind of ring was it that he gave to her?
It was an emerald ring.
It wasn't the one that she had requested?
Right.
By now, Betty was tolerating Dan's trysts with Linda, but Betty was the unlikely beneficiary of Linda's influence on Dan. Betty claimed there was absolutely no foreplay in their lovemaking until he met up with Linda Coquina, who was apparently dissatisfied enough that she taught him a few tricks. He bought a book on the G-spot that he would read in front of Betty. He would try out techniques on her, which she thoroughly enjoyed. It was pleasurable, but painful at the same time. One time, Dan lay in bed, seemingly asleep, when she hears him murmur, "Linda, Linda." But she knew he was awake. He was doing that just to hurt her. In the meantime, Linda was now crying openly. If the marriage was over, as Dan had said, if he was in love with her, as he said, then why wasn't this drama coming to a speedy, logical conclusion? Why wasn't he divorcing Betty and marrying her? According to her sister Maggie, Linda was ashamed of what she was doing. Linda didn't tell her sister she and Dan were involved until long after, and she knew her pious father would never approve. On February 28, 1985, Betty lay in bed watching the nightly news. Dan walked in. "I'm leaving." "Where are you going?" she said, mindlessly flipping through the channels. She thought he might be going to the 7-Eleven. "I'm moving out. I'm not happy." He started carrying his clothes out to the red Corvette. In the past they would fight, but he would never leave. "What the hell's happening now?" He ignored her. When he was finished transferring the clothes to the car, he came back. "So you're just leaving for the rest of the marriage? What about me? What about the kids? What are we supposed to do?" "Frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn." Kim remembered her mother getting angry and throwing a bottle of Dom Perignon champagne at Dan. Betty said her husband just came home that day and announced he needed more space and was leaving.
I know Dad got home. It was around 8 or 9. We were still up, so it could have been later than that. And he went in the room, and then they got in some argument about something, I don't know what. And then Mom took hair gel and threw it at him. And then he came out and left. I think that's all that happened. He just grabbed some stuff and said he was leaving. Then he told us he was leaving, and then he left.
"Do you want me to leave now or in the morning?" Dan asked. "Is it Linda?" "No, Linda has nothing to do with this." They climbed into bed. In the morning he didn't say anything, not even goodbye. Just got up and left while she was still sleeping.
Okay. And did he tell you why he was moving out?
No, he just came home from work, and I was laying on the bed watching the news. It was kind of 6:30 or something, and he just said, "I'm leaving." And I said, "Oh, where are you going?" I didn't realize it was, "I'm leaving."
Okay. Did eventually he tell you that he is leaving permanently or just moving out of the house for some period of time?
He said he was, then I caught on that he was leaving, and he started taking his sweaters out of the armoire and packing the red Corvette with his clothes.
Okay. At that time, did he move out right then?
Well, he packed the red Corvette, and then he came back in the house, and he said, "Do you want me to leave now or in the morning?" And I said, "Oh, no. I'm married to a lawyer long enough to know not to answer that question. You leave whenever you want to leave." And so he stayed the night.
Did he leave that morning?
Yes, he left the next morning.
Betty told reporters he literally walked out 3 months after his 40th birthday with a red Corvette and a 21-year-old. Are we the American joke or not? "If you weren't my husband, I'd think you were real funny. He's got a scarf around his neck, and he wanted those Ray-Ban sunglasses from Risky Business. I said, 'You're it. You are the cover of Midlife Crises magazine. Cool, Dan, cool. Dan resented the suggestion his life had been a middle-aged cliche.
She tells my children that we had a blissful, happy, healthy marriage until I went crazy when I turned 40. I mean, that's just pure fiction. It's a figment of her imagination.
In April, Dan was in the neighborhood on some business when he meets up with Betty. Betty said she wanted to talk to him.
Yes, we left the house and we went down to a restaurant on the beach right near my house. And I wanted to have a business meeting with him. I wanted to ask him what his intentions were, what's going on here. I mean, where am I going to live? How much money are you going to give me for rent and food? And are you going to pay for the car? And are you going to pay the charge accounts? And my checking account was overdrawn when he walked out. And I tried to have a business meeting with him and say, okay, Dan, you need your space and you're unhappy and all this, but, what's happening here? What's the plan tell me what's happening here? And he wouldn't.
Had Dan said something about needing a space?
Oh, absolutely. He was unhappy. He needed his space.
Did he say that he was moving out to get divorced?
No, he never mentioned the word divorce. He never even mentioned separation.
Dan moved into the Coral Reef house that had the foundation damaged while repairs were being made. He slept on a mattress on the floor. Betty and the children stayed in the rental house. Betty figured she just had to give Dan time to get over his midlife crises and his middle-aged passion for Linda Coquina. This was just a phase, something they would be able to laugh about one day. 6 weeks later, as a countermeasure, she decided to drop off the kids one by one, restricting his freedom.
Well, it was on Easter, the night before Easter, and Mom and I got in an argument because I had this friend over that I wanted her to take home. And we had just been at Warden Springs, and she didn't want to take her home. She was tired, so she said no. And we got in an argument, so I went back into my room. And then Mom came in and said that pack up and leave, that she didn't want me there anymore. I can go live with Dad, so then I packed up and left.
So you packed up your clothes, and did she take you over to your dad's house?
Yes.
What time of night or day was that?
8 or 9 at night.
And
we had gotten back from Warren Springs that day, so it was pretty late.
And was it just you by yourself that she took over to Coral Reef?
Yes.
And left you there?
Yes.
Was your dad home when she left you there?
No.
Were you able?
He didn't know I was coming.
Were you able to get into the house, or did you have to wait outside?
I waited outside, and then I went around the back and got in later. And then he called, and I answered the phone, and he panicked and hung up on me because he didn't know. He thought he called the wrong number, or he didn't know who was in his house. So then he called back, and then he came home.
So then he called back, and when you realized that you were at home, he came home.
Right.
Was there any furniture in the house at that time?
No.
At some later point, did either of your brothers or sister come over to Coral Reef?
My brother, Danny, came over the next day on Easter, and then my sister, Lee, and Rhett came over a month or two later.
How was it that Danny was brought over?
He was fighting with Rhett, and Mom had enough of it, so she told him to pack up and move with me.
Did she actually bring him over?
Yes.
What was his emotional state when he was brought over?
He was really upset. He didn't want to come over there.
Was he crying?
Yes.
And then you indicated some couple weeks, month later, both Lee and Rhett were brought at the same time?
Yes, they were.
And again, what was the circumstances of them being brought over?
They were hysterically crying. They were very upset. Dad wasn't home. It was late at night, and I don't know what had occurred at that house that made her bring them over, but she brought them over and dropped them off in the living room.
And did she say anything about why she was dropping them off in the living room?
She said, let him try and deal with 4 kids. No, she didn't give us much of a reason. She just said she wasn't going to be left here with 4 kids, so he could have us.
Betty said to Kim, "Your dad's not going to get away with this. Let him deal with 4 kids." Yeah. Let him see what it's like to take care of children who are in school all day. and there's so much housework for the maid to do. Let him see what it takes to feed these kids. McDonald's. It will humble him right quick. They don't call her Supermom for nothing.
How about during that time, was she stuck at home doing all of the housework? Did she have any help with the housework?
We had au pair girls that lived with us sometimes. We had a maid.
At some point you hired a maid named Maria Montez?
Yeah.
This is what an au pair they once hired wrote back home to her folks. Betty is very nice and considerate, but she was always off to some school or charity event. Little Red cries whenever she leaves the room because she is not there enough. Too often, Mrs. Broderick would simply order in pizza or Chinese before departing to some social function. Kim testified, "At first Dad figured she was going to come take us back. He had no idea what to do with us, and then gradually he got very good at it." The kids were not aware that Betty was angry at their father because he was having an affair. The night Danny Jr. was dropped off, Dan calls her back. Great, exactly the reaction she was looking for. It's working. Dan tells her, "You gotta get out of the house! The lease is up!" After her panicked cries that he left her totally helpless on how to deal with the business end of things because he always handled it, he tells her, "Don't worry, we're not getting divorced. We're buying a house. We're getting back together." Betty mentioned to her parents, "Dan's having a midlife crisis. He's sleeping with his secretary. But don't worry, we're working it out. We're not getting divorced." Her parents were relieved. So Dan once again asked Betty to find a house that they could live in. She brought up a residence they had seen before, the Calle del Cielo house. He finally agreed to buy it. The Cielo house was a major fixer-upper. The original plans were to tear down the structure and build a new one. Betty sent the furniture, her clothes, and possessions from the rental to the Coral Reef house. Dan made a $140,000 down payment on the $650,000 house. But closing was delayed. The rental lease expired, and Betty had to find a place to live. She figured she'd move in with Dan. By now, all the kids were there. 5 days after she moved in, Dan said he needed some space. He told her to move into the Cielo house as it had just been signed off. He told her to get it ready for the architect and he'll take care of the kids and everything else. Betty needed a $5,000 check to get a soils engineer to test the soil for the architect. Dan said he was in a cash crunch after providing the down payment for the house, so it would have to be delayed.
He wasn't telling him anything about the marriage. He just needed his space.
Okay, so he wasn't telling you the marriage was over?
No.
Did,
No, we were going to buy it. We were still buying a house.
Did you?
Through all this time, we were always negotiating on and buying a house.
In fact, did you find a house and negotiate?
It wasn't that I found the house just then. It was the same property we had looked at before. It was still available. The price had gone down literally hundreds of thousands of dollars. We ended up buying a property that we had been looking at for a long time, yes, with only the intention of knocking the house that stood on it down and building the dream house that Dan wanted.
You remember when it was that that house was bought?
Right around when I had to get out of the rental, right in June of '85.
The property was transferred to Calle del Cielo to you and Daniel Broderick?
Yes, it was supposed to be a simultaneous closing with me having to get out of the rental, but there was dry rot in one of the bathrooms, and Dan argued with the owners about them making those repairs before we closed. So therefore, with the day I had to get out of the rental, or we all had to get out of the rental, we couldn't make a move into the other house. So everything ended up going back to Coral Reef.
And when you say everything, what are you talking about?
Literally everything.
You mean furniture?
All of our
clothes?
worldly possessions, the cars, the surfboards, the tennis rackets, the clothes, the furniture, everything.
At this point in time, you were still, there were still conversations with Don Edson about tearing that house down and building a new one?
Yes, he was happy that we found a lot that we could both agree upon, and he was going to start right away doing soils testing, because we were knocking this house down completely and going to restructure the whole lot. And the first step was a soils engineer, and I had to get a $5,000 check from Dan to retain a soils engineer.
And was Dan involved in these discussions?
Yes, and he told me to go see Don Edson, and he told me to make the plans for this house. And it wasn't a house that you could remodel. The foundations were bad and stuff. It was a house you had to take away and start again.
And when you were talking about it, was he talking about it that you were going to live there yourself, going to live there as a family?
I was going to be, and this applied to Fairbanks Ranch too, I was going to be more or less the supervisor of building a large custom home. Is so far as the plans and the appointments, it's a full-time job, and Dan was too busy. So I was supposed to be the person that was going to be in charge of this project.
But who was going to move into the house? Were you going to move in yourself, or you and Dan?
Well, I moved in the beginning to give Dan his space, but once the house was torn down, I would have had to move back to Coral Reef.
Dan's take on this? Dan testified in divorce court that he told Betty he was clearly not moving into the Cielo house with her. But she would act as if I didn't open my mouth and say instead, "We'll put a second story on it, and we will do this, and we will do that." I told her, "Bets, you're not listening to me. I am not going to move into this house." Betty said he lied. He never told me he was leaving me for good. Dan never provided the $5,000 check.
How were you living at Cali de Cielo?
I was temporarily camping on the floor, and I hadn't moved any furniture in or anything because I was still believing that this house was being torn down. And I was giving Dan his space, and the soils engineer was supposed to arrive and start doing his thing, and then that fell through because of the $5,000.
June 1985. Betty would traipse in and out of Dan's house as she pleased, usually catering to the kids' needs. One day in June, Betty arrived at Dan's place to notice he bought furniture, redid the landscaping, and redecorated the Coral Reef house. She was outraged. "I couldn't believe it. He ruined my house that I worked so hard to make beautiful. He put in this yucky wallpaper and flooring, and he tore out mature landscaping and put in 50-cent marigolds. He destroyed my house." With a can of Rust-Oleum paint, she went through some of the rooms, spraying the walls black. Dan later said he was only trying to make the house livable for Betty and the children. He said he still expected Betty to come to her senses and move back into the family home with the children. He planned to move to a condo. Betty was still under the impression they would be getting back together, so for him to redo Coral Reef without consulting her was highly abnormal. He insisted he did try to consult Betty on the new decorations, but she wouldn't discuss them. Betty says he never made any effort whatsoever to contact her. It was around June that Betty erupted periodically in outlandish and violent behavior. She started on rampages, throwing stuff through windows and breaking mirrors and spray painting the walls. I mean, unbelievable things.
She came over one time and hit an umbrella through the front door. The glass, I guess it wasn't. It was the front window, I'm sorry, front window. And she spray painted the house once. And then another time she smeared lipstick on the bathroom mirror saying something, but I don't remember what it said. And then another time she smeared just Boston cream pie all over my dad's bed. And
When she, you said she wrote something in lipstick on the mirrors. Was it anything vulgar?
yeah, I think it was bad word or something. I don't remember. It wasn't nice.
Since there was nothing to do, and she sensed she was not welcome in Dan's house, she decided to take a weekend trip. When she came back, she found out the kids weren't there. Dan had sent them off to Gold Arrow Camp. Betty found the application, and it said, in case of emergency and Dan couldn't be reached, the camp should call his brother Larry in Colorado. She waited for them to return from camp, but Dan sent them to his parents' house in Ohio. He bought the tickets and put them on the plane. She tried calling them at Dan's parents' house, only to be told coldly the children were not available. Betty was frightened. She was being shut out. The family was moving on without her. While the kids were gone, Betty decided to take a trip to Canada. While there, she bought her husband a tie and sent it to him. He sent it back. August 1985. Normally Betty spent on charge cards and Dan paid them off. He would also give her $4,000 monthly to pay things she couldn't pay on credit cards, such as for the gardener and cafe tips. He paid the mortgage, taxes, and insurance, and all the other bills. But now that he left, she used charge cards to buy whatever she needed. Sometimes he sent checks, but since they didn't talk, she never knew when to expect them. This made her feel helpless, at his mercy. So she charged out the kazoo. It got Dan's attention. He came to see her over the charges he claimed were astronomical. He wanted to put her on a budget and have her pay her own bills. Until the late 70s or early 80s, you were responsible in the way you spent and managed money. You would adhere to a budget, but he testified she had become grossly irresponsible. So he decided to teach her to pay her own bills. When he stopped over to her place, she was flirty. She looked good, smelled good, purred at him, playing the helpless little girl. But Dan's mind was strictly on the books. Sitting at the kitchen table with a legal tablet and calculator, he worked out her financial requirements as what her permanent allowance should be. About half of it went to her monthly mortgage, and the rest of it would be for living expenses. Since he was raising the kids, there was no allowance made for them. "Yes, hon," she murmured. She wasn't even paying attention to the numbers. Not until later would she compare her former spending habits with what she had to work with now. No more shopping binges or trips whenever and wherever she wanted. Even the grocery allowance was not large enough to accommodate the kids, as they were over at her place as much as his. He told her he would pay down all her credit cards, but she would be paying her own bills from then on. He allotted her $9,000 a month for her needs. He also agreed to continue paying her insurance, taxes, and the fees for her social outlets, including the country clubs and charities.
At some time in 1985, did you start getting some money, living money, from Dan Broderick?
Yes, again, we're still in October 85. He came to my house in La Jolla Shores, and he decided he was going to give me a budget. He wanted me to learn to be independent. And I said I didn't want to do it.
And what kind of budget, what did he do?
Well, he made out what I would need. He decided, because I had no idea what I would need. I've never paid any of the bills. And so he decided that if I had this much for this and this much for that, then I'd need this much for a month. And then at the bottom of the page, he said that he'd continue paying house insurance and taxes and car insurance and health insurance and all these other things, but he'd give me this much a month, and there would be $4,500 for the house payment and the gas and electric and the phone and the gardener and the travel and the food and the maid, and it came, in his estimation, to $9,000 a month.
Now, before that, you had been living on your credit cards?
Yes.
September 1985. Betty received a stack of letters. They notified her Dan Broderick was no longer legally responsible for any debts incurred by his wife, Betty Broderick. "Something here for you, ma'am," a man in a sheriff's uniform said, holding a large envelope. Your husband wanted you served at the Bishop School luncheon, but I couldn't locate you there among all those ladies. Divorce papers. Dan was trying to have her served at Bishop School to humiliate her.
Fall of 1985 was a particular function that year that I worked on the committee and I had to attend, yes.
And what function was that?
It was the annual ladies' luncheon at the Bishop School where my daughter Lee was a student.
Okay. And who would be present at that luncheon?
Several hundred mothers and friends and all ladies. And it was outdoors and it was a fashion show and it was very nice.
Okay. Now, during the time that you were married to Dan Broderick, would he talk to you about his work?
Yes, all the time.
Okay. And what would he tell you about how, did he tell you what he would do in lawsuits to affect the opponent or the other side?
Yes, to humiliate people, yes.
The divorce papers came as a shock to Betty. He never even mentioned divorce when he went over her bills. I give everyone the benefit of the doubt until they come up and shoot me between the eyes. I was real surprised and upset, and I needed a lawyer fast. Betty said Dan used to lie in bed figuring out humiliating ways of having people served in public. Nasty grams, he called them.
About one time he had to serve, or he needed to serve papers on a doctor, and he knew that the doctor was an important person in his church, and he purposely served the doctor on Christmas Eve in the front row of his church with the papers just for maximum humiliation and upset. And should I keep going?
Yes. What else did he tell you about the way he practiced, the way at least he was practicing law?
Just that, you play surprise and hardball. That was a very familiar term. And you do everything you can to make the person say uncle. Make the person give up. And you don't let up, and you just pound at them.
Dan went for the jugular. His favorite was punies, as he called them. Punitive damages were not covered by malpractice insurance, and there was no cap on it. Doctors were deathly afraid of punies and would have to reach deep into their pockets to pay them. The more punies Dan could get, the more he inflicted pain and suffering. Defendants were so afraid of Dan that they would willingly settle out of court, making the money come in that much faster without half the work. It wasn't enough to have insurance companies pay out millions. He had to personally hurt the doctors as well. Betty remembered the look in other people's eyes when Dan took them on. This time it was in her eyes. Dan would crush her like any other adversary. She used to admire his increasing skill, his killer instinct, his success at any cost. She never thought she'd be on the receiving end of that. Betty said this about Dan. Dan was good with juries. He could paint these elaborate mental images of pain and suffering, and he could turn a hangnail into a lifelong disability and the cause of an agonizing lifetime of pain and suffering. Basically, what I think is that courtrooms are all theater and drama. Dan had the acting skills and the looks for his role, so he won there. That's all it boils down to. As one lawyer stated, anybody who's had Dan Broderick on the other side thinks he's a royal jerk. He's so difficult to deal with. He's the coldest man you'll ever meet, unless he wants something from you. In the 1980s, an au pair wrote letters to home about working for the Brodericks. She disliked Dan intensely. He was so cold and unfriendly until one night he found her in the jacuzzi and suggested they go horseback riding the next day, and he would tell everyone he had left his old lady. In Betty's letter introduced in her trial, she wrote, "You're cold. You never have time for me. You're not affectionate." October 1985. Betty went through the phone book searching for the best lawyer she could find, but nobody wanted to take on Dan Broderick. He was a tremendous source of referrals for them. They wanted to be his friend. He was also grooming himself to be the next president of the San Diego County Bar Association. She first called Thomas Ashworth, who had been Dan's divorce attorney for a year. He bowed out from representing her since he was up for a judgeship. The next time she saw him, he would be sitting across the courtroom as Dan's attorney. Ashworth would be later appointed judge of family court and involved peripherally where the divorce battle would take place, which would be a clear conflict of interest.
Sometime in end of 1986 and 1987, did Mr. Ashworth had been Mr. Broderick's attorney?
Yes, that was his original attorney.
Okay, did someone else in his firm take over as the attorney?
Yes,
Okay, and who was that?
Gerald Barry,
And what was the reason that Gerald Barrett took over?
because Mr. Ashworth was made a judge in the family court.
And when you say a judge in the family court, where was family court located then?
On 6th Avenue, it's a little brick building on 6th Avenue.
Okay, and 4 or 5 judges in that building?
Yes, I think there's 4 courtrooms.
And at some point in time, when you got some legal paper, did Mr. Ashworth now name start appearing on some of that from the court as a judge?
Right, Judge Thomas Schaff.
And what was your feelings about that?
Well, I had already had feelings that I was shut out of the system because of not being able to get an attorney, including Mr. Ashworth, and now I felt that in the little court system with him running the place as a judge, it seemed like a conflict of interest to me.
As she was scouting for lawyers, one lawyer told her she needed an out-of-town lawyer. Go to Los Angeles, because no good divorce lawyer in this town is going to take on Dan Broderick. The lawyer referred her to Daniel Jaffe. The day I was to go to L.A. to hire Jaffe, I went to Coral Reef first, Betty testified. I said, Dan, why are you making me do this? I don't want to hire a lawyer. Let's get together and work this out. I don't think I should hire an attorney. It's just a lot of money wasted. I just didn't want to hire a lawyer. She drove to L.A. and hired Jaffe as her attorney. Jaffe was willing to take on her case as a favor to the lawyer that recommended him to Betty. He didn't need the work. He had more cases than he could handle, and having to travel back and forth from L.A. to San Diego just made her case even more cumbersome. Dan Jaffe told her his estimate for her side of the divorce was over $100,000. Jaffe told her, don't go to work and don't sign anything except a contract stating his fee was $250 an hour and a $10,000 retainer fee to get started. She assumed Dan would pay his $10,000 retainer fee, but when it was discovered he wouldn't, Jaffe told her, that's all right, you can pay me. She would get it back in the divorce settlement. But since she didn't pay him, he could get his fee from the settlement, which was often how he got paid from wives who usually didn't have the money available. Betty then went to celebrate her deal with Jaffe by buying herself a maroon Jaguar, which she spotted parked on a Beverly Hills street with a for sale sign in the window. It cost $15,000. A male out-of-town acquaintance of hers, who she met on one of her summer trips, came by to pay her a visit. She had told him anytime he was in the neighborhood to look her up. They got along swimmingly, but she said she couldn't get involved. She was still waiting to see if she would be getting back with Dan.
After you were told that there was going to be a divorce, did you contact anybody? Did you contact an attorney at some point in time in Los Angeles?
When I first got served with the divorce papers, that's the only thing I knew to do. I didn't know what else to do with them. So I started calling San Diego lawyers. It didn't occur to me to go to LA. I called about 8 lawyers right away, trying to hire a lawyer to defend myself. That's what I said. I was the defendant and he was the plaintiff, and I had to defend this action. And I needed a lawyer. And so I called all the lawyers, all the good divorce lawyers of reputation that I knew in San Diego County.
Were any of them willing to take the case?
No, in that one day, every single one of them said absolutely no. They would have nothing to do with the case because they knew Dan so well.
Okay. And did you eventually go to Los Angeles for a lawyer?
Only because a local attorney,
What's the standing?
Did you eventually go to a Los Angeles lawyer?
I was referred to one by a San Diego attorney, yes.
Okay. And why did you go? Why was the reason that you went to a Los Angeles attorney?
Because the well-known San Diego attorney advised me to quit trying, that no one in this town is going to help you, that you have to go out of town. And as a personal favor to me, although I've never met the woman, as a personal favor to me, she arranged this appointment with Mr. Jaffe.
Okay.
And he did it as a favor to her
And where was Mr. Jaffe located?
in Los Angeles.
Okay. And did you reach an agreement with Mr. Jaffe?
He said he really didn't want to take the case. He didn't want to come to San Diego. It was inconvenient for him. He had more cases than he knew what to do with up there. But as a favor to this other attorney, he would try and represent me. And I signed an agreement. Should I keep going? I saw him the one day. I hired him. I signed the agreement. He told me not to worry.
Objection, non-responsive. That's not a question.
Okay. What did he tell you? Did you talk to him about money and how he was going to get paid? You can answer that yes or no.
Yes.
And what did he tell you?
Objection, hearsay. Overruled, you can answer that.
He told me that he would need a $10,000 retainer, that his fees on my half of the case alone would be over $100,000, and that I should not sign anything, and he would get the money, the $10,000 retainer from Dan, because I didn't have any money, and he would get it from Dan, and the court would decide later whose half of the money it actually came out of. But since Dan controlled all the money, he had to get it from Dan. And he said that was pretty usual, and I shouldn't worry about anything.
During one of her visits at Dan's, she noticed a sloppy-looking Boston cream pie sitting on the counter. She figured the kids were baking. She asked who made the pie. The maid told her Linda brought it over when she visited last night. Oh, that's nice. Betty took the pie to the master bedroom and threw it on the bed. She dug her fingers in and flung hunks of it onto the bedspread and the walls. She smeared the cream and chocolate all over Dan's cashmere sweaters, crying. Then she wiped her hands on the bedspread and left. The housekeeper noticed Betty running from the house, but paid little attention to a woman who was always in and out. Then she heard Lise screaming. The housekeeper said she ran upstairs to find the entire room devastated.
It was on the counter as I was leaving, and I believe Marta was the babysitter then. And I said, it looked like a child made it. So I said, oh, who made the cake? And she said, Linda. And I said, Linda who? And she said, Linda at the office. And I said, oh.
Now, was that at a time when Dan was still denying that there was a relationship with Linda Kokina, or do you remember?
It's all so close. It's in October there. I don't remember. I think he was still denying her. That's why I would have said Linda who. Anyway, I'm not done.
Okay.
When she turned her back or something, I took the cake and I smushed it around his bed on the bedspread and stuff. Like, nice Boston cream pie.
Did you get you
I got in
billed for the cleaning bill at some time?
I got in big trouble, and it was a typical Dan Broderick trouble. He billed me for so much more damage than any one little cake could have done. You know, it was a plaintiff attorney's complaint. He claimed I dirtied everything he ever owned and had to send it to the cleaners, and he billed me a huge amount. And he greatly exaggerated what damage was done by the Boston cream pie.
2 days later, Dan applied for a restraining order. 2 days after that, Betty stopped by Dan's to pick up 6-year-old Rhett for his soccer game held every Saturday. She beeped the horn. No one came out. She looked all over and then went to the neighbor's house. They didn't know anything. She was the coach, and the whole team was waiting. She had to be there for the other kids. She got angry that this was another setup by Dan. She picked up a rock and threw it through his living room window. Dan's take on this? At one time, I had taken the kids to get haircuts. and she was expecting them at a soccer game. I didn't know they were supposed to be at a soccer game. I'm not that kind of person that I would take them to get a haircut just to spite her. I came back and there were hundreds, maybe thousands of dollars in damages. I mean, windows broken and chandeliers cracked and stereo smashed. It was unbelievable stuff.
I had to pick him up on Saturdays. The babysitter was supposed to take him to practices on Wednesday, but she wouldn't do it. And then I had to pick him up on Saturdays, yes. And I called ahead. You want this particular Saturday?
Yes, if you could tell me about the particular Saturday.
It was well into the season, and again, the only reason I'm doing this is so Rhett can have a team. And on Wednesdays, the babysitter who lived very close to the field and did have a car to drive, for some reason, whether it was her own or Dan told her to, would not deliver Rhett to the field to practice or to play. So I was real upset about that. And then they wouldn't bring him to games on Saturday or anything. So there's one particular Saturday, I called and I said, "Are you ready? I'm going to come over and get you." And Kim told me that he had his little uniform on, which is in that picture, and he was indeed ready, and I would be there in the few minutes it took me to go up the hill and get him. I was on my way over. I hung up the phone and I got in the car and I went to go get him.
And when you got to the house, what happened?
There was absolutely nobody there. None of the children, no Dan, nothing. Nobody was there.
Okay. Did you find out where they went?
Not until much later. I went to a neighbor's house and said, "What happened? Where'd they go?" And she didn't know anything, and the car was gone, and they were all gone.
Were you upset?
Very. I mean, I called. They knew I was coming. It only took me a few minutes to get there. I felt that Dan purposely took the kids so that I couldn't get Rhett to the soccer game.
Okay. And did you do anything at the house that day?
Yes, it was my house, and I was in the house, and this is after I definitely knew about Linda. And the kids had been complaining about no food. That was a big thing, about no food. So I looked in the refrigerator, and there was no food. All that was in there was cheap champagne, not one speck of food. And so I got mad, and I took the bottle of cheap champagne, and I threw it through a window as a, "Thanks a lot, I've been here." But I had to leave. I had to run to the soccer game because I had to be there to run it.
Okay. Did you later have an argument with Mr. Broderick when you found out where he said that he had to take the children that morning? Do you know?
It was hard for me to have an argument with Mr. Broderick. He wouldn't talk to me.
Were you later told where Rhett was when you came to pick him up?
He took them down to the Save-On drugstore in Pacific Beach for something.
When Dan went to the police, they were helpless without a court order. As an attorney, he should know that since her name was on the deed, she can do whatever she wants. So Dan decided to move out of the house and sell it. Days later, a judge granted Dan the restraining order forbidding Betty entry into the house without Dan's permission. When she went to Coral Reef, her things had been moved into the garage. The maid Dan hired met her at the door wearing her clothes. "Your husband gave me your bed and your clothes. He said I could have the rest of the stuff in the garage. He said it was all junk." "He did?" Betty said. "I'm sorry, but those are all my things. They're not throwaways. I mean, that's everything I own. That's my real stuff, not the excess. I'm living in an empty house with one suitcase and no bed and no furniture. I need those things."
That was the next babysitter. That was Marta, who ended up wearing my clothes and stuff. She had asked me, and this is the next babysitter. We had problems with the first one, too, of a different nature. But the next babysitter kept asking me if she could have all the stuff that was in the garage. And all the stuff that was in the garage was not excess stuff. It was all of my personal things, because I'm only living at this other house on the carpet. I don't have anything. I have a suitcase. So she's talking about all my clothes and furniture and everything. And I told her really nicely that that's not garage sale stuff. That's the real stuff. That's not extra, and it's not being thrown away. So she gave up on asking me and asked Dan if she could have stuff in the garage, and he gave her my brass bed and a sofa. And one day when I came to the house, she was wearing my clothes. She answered the door in my clothes.
Were you upset?
I just said, where did you get those clothes? And she said, "Well, they said I could have anything I wanted." Yeah, I was upset.
Did anything happen with your furniture?
That was the furniture that he gave. She had removed it from the house and took it wherever she was living. Gave away the furniture. And I told this woman at least 3 times that she couldn't have it.
Did you get upset about that?
Absolutely, and she ended up bringing the bed back. I don't remember if she brought the sofa back or not, but yes. And Kim more or less went along with this and said the woman could have anything she wanted. So I told Kim, no, babysitters cannot have my stuff. Do not be giving things away.
October 28th was coming up. For 17 years, she and Dan would go to his brother Larry's place for Oktoberfest, and from there they'd go to Notre Dame and watch the game to commemorate the weekend they first met. But this year, Dan was taking the kids and going without her. He called Betty drunkenly, saying, "Did you know it was 20 years ago tonight that we met? God, how I loved you. How beautiful you were. Remember all the good times we had?" Her sister-in-law called to tell Betty that Dan had come to the Oktoberfest with his secretary, Linda. Once again, Betty wanted to talk to Dan. Betty had asked Dan to come over to her place so I could tell him again how stupid all this was. She tried one more time to talk him out of leaving her. I told him he was a fool, that it wouldn't last. I said, "Dan, what are you doing here? I love you. We have a wonderful family. We've accomplished everything we've been working so hard for. The only person who's going to win in this whole thing is Linda Kokina. Everyone whose last name is Broderick, you, me, and the kids are going to lose." She urged him to see a therapist. Then he would see he was exactly ripe for having the predetermined midlife crises that every guy has. While she had him there, I demanded the truth about Linda. He said, "You've been right all along. I've been having an affair with Linda for 3 years. Betty was outraged. She screamed. She began hitting him with her fists. He grabbed her hands and held her down. "You're sick. You're crazy. You need help. Get dressed. I'm taking you to a mental institution and having you committed." "I loved you. I trusted you. Yes, I'm upset. You've been lying to me for 3 years, but that doesn't make me sick. Your illness is what caused me to be with Linda in the first place." Betty got up and walked into the bedroom. She could hear him pick up the telephone and dial. "She won't come. Tell the doctor my wife refuses to be committed." Dan's take on this? He admitted he attempted to take his wife to a mental hospital through divorce court documents, but it was because he thought she was going to commit suicide.
Well, I had a phone call from Larry's wife, or I was talking to Larry, his brother's wife, and she informed me that Dan went to the annual Oktoberfest party in Denver and that he brought Linda Kokina with him. I couldn't believe it. You know, here he kept telling me, I can't control where she goes, if she goes to this party or that party. It's just a coincidence that she goes where I go, and it's all business. So I called him up and I said, I want to hear this. I want to hear this in person. I want to know how Linda Kokina got on a plane and ended up at your brother's party in Denver. I really want to hear this explanation. So he came over, and I was like, come on, let's hear it. I want to hear the truth.
Did he try to take you anywhere that day?
Well, he told me the truth. He finally told me the truth.
Okay. Now, and what did he tell you?
All he would tell, he wouldn't tell me any details or anything else. All he told me was, I was right. I've been right all along.
And how did that make you feel?
Well, it kind of made me feel better that at least I knew the truth, but it made me feel like that he had taken really gross, unfair advantage of me for a long time, switching. You know, now I'm standing in this house that's empty. My kids are gone. I have no money. I have no control. I mean, it's a little late to be telling me the truth. And you know, and then I've got all this stuff going on in my mind about typical Dan Broderick. You know, don't even begin negotiating till you're sitting on their chest. You know, and knock someone to their knees. And I've been really badly used and abused by a liar for over 2 years. And I was very upset and very angry about it. And he wanted to take me to a mental institution. That was his answer to me getting upset.
Would you go with him?
Thank goodness, no. I wasn't dressed. I had been out that day at something, and I had a slip and a robe over it. I didn't have clothes on, and he tried pushing me he literally pushed me in the bedroom and tried to make me put clothes on, and I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't get dressed. Otherwise, he would have dragged me off.
And were you upset at that time?
I was absolutely furious because I felt he had really lied and manipulated me out of houses and manipulated me out of the kids, and I just couldn't. I was very I don't even know the words for it. He had looked me in the eye and lied and lied and lied and lied a billion times and kept telling me, this isn't what's happening, this is what's happening.